Hello, everybody, and welcome. We're going to give it about a minute or two just to give time for people to get into the session this morning. Hope everyone is having a good morning so far. I'll give it about one more minute and then we'll go ahead and get started for the today. All right. Well, welcome and thank you for joining us for today's webinar on BBB's Learning Lab, Real Estate Strategies for Business Owners featuring Nelnet Real Estate Ventures. I'm Jenny Tukeski. I am the Programming and Communications Manager here for the Better Business Bureau Midwest Plains. Just a few housekeeping notes just for you real quick. First, the webinar is being recorded today, so then that way we can use this for future reference, but also within 24 to 48 hours, I will be sending out a follow-up email to you with not only a link to the webinar, but also the presentation and materials that Andrew goes over today, so then that way you have it for future reference. Also, if you have any questions, please feel free to put them in the chat and we will answer and make sure we get to all the questions by the end of the presentation today. So with that, we'll go ahead and get started. Real estate decisions can have a significant impact on your business's growth and long-term success. Whether you're buying, leasing, expanding, or evaluating your current space, today's session will provide practical strategies to help you make informed decisions. It's my pleasure to introduce our speaker today, Andrew Lempka. Andrew serves as the director of Nelnet Real Estate Ventures, where he oversees the company's commercial real estate investment activities, management, and portfolio strategies. As a commercial real estate investment professional and CFA, he brings extensive experience helping organizations make strategic real estate decisions that support long-term growth and success. In addition to his work at Nelnet, Andrew is passionate about mentoring students and sharing his expertise with those interested in commercial real estate and investment. So with that, welcome. And Andrew, it's all yours.
Perfect. Thanks so much, Jenny. So Andrew Lempka here at Nelnet Real Estate Ventures, a wholly owned subsidiary of Nelnet Inc., headquartered in Lincoln, Nebraska. As Jenny mentioned, feel free to chime in the chat as we roll through this. I'm happy to answer any questions kind of directly maybe laid out in the materials or any tangents that maybe pop up that folks want to know about. So just a quick agenda, just going to roll through some brief Nelnet background as well as our real estate activity, a little bit of a landscape and discussion from a landlord's point of view, lease versus own, some leasing mistakes to avoid, some site selection 101, and then negotiating leverage. So as I mentioned, Nelnet Real Estate Ventures is a wholly owned subsidiary and investment arm of Nelnet Inc. Started in 2012. Our active portfolio is about $250 million across 50 transactions in 15 states. We really provide a role as investment capital and strategic decision-making partner for small and medium-sized real estate shops. And right now we're most active in multifamily and industrial, but still have office, retail, hospitality, and other exposure throughout the portfolio. So from a landlord's point of view, this may seem table stakes, but obviously step one is a potential tenant's ability to pay. For a landlord, there is time, effort, that goes into re-tenanting a space, getting a tenant in there. And so while we always want to find the right and best tenant for that time, we also don't want to have to rework that. 1, 3, 5 years down the line if we can. And so we're trying to make sure that we get a good tenant in that space, obviously for the core lease term, but hopefully for extensions um, or potentially renewals. So step one, we're looking at some occupancy cost ratios. So again, we're thinking about your total cost to occupy a space. So that's going to be base rent plus your triple nets if it is a triple net lease. And if it's a gross lease, obviously just that base rent. Um, and then we're taking that number divided by sales. So we've got kind of some broad industry standards here between different use types of retail, restaurants, office, and industrial. Again, those are very broad examples, um, and will change a little bit depending on, you know, core asset and market, as well as the tenant who's potentially going in there. Um, Another item that landlords are thinking about is if it's a single tenant building, obviously we don't have to worry too much about how that tenant's maybe going to interact with other tenants in our building. But if it's a multi-tenant building or if a landlord has multiple assets in a very small geographic range, um, we're going to want to make sure that there's a good tenant fit with those adjacent tenants. Again, kind of going back to what I mentioned earlier of just you don't want to set someone up to fail from day one, and you don't want to put a tenant in a space where there's going to be conflict with um, other folks in those buildings. Um, Additionally, especially thinking about retail or office, want to make sure that those tenants have ideally, a like kind use or potentially an additive use um, to the building. One example of this would be in our mixed use buildings. That's where we'll have, multifamily on the upper floors and maybe some office and retail on the first floor. We're trying to get tenants that will add value on that office and retail concept to the multifamily tenants above. Um, and then lastly, what additional investments will the landlord need to make to sign the lease? So, step one, we're going to have leasing commissions, tenant improvement allowance, as well as probably some potentially some additional landlord work as it relates to maybe some deferred maintenance, upgrades to electrical, plumbing, functionality, demising walls if a space is too big for that tenant's requirement. And so for us, we're baking all of that in and evaluating kind of our total cost to then occupy that space with a new tenant. Next, wanted to talk about lease versus own. Um, so really, this comes down to a capital allocation question, and I'd kind of lay it out between there is there could be an element of some divergent interests here between, let's call it the operating business and the entity that owns the property. Um, Candidly, we see this a lot with medical professionals where they will buy, the building and then have the practice rent the building back from them. Um, you've got kind of key decision makers that are similar on both sides. However, there could be some diverting interest between those two groups over time. Um, and so that's kind of step one. Additionally, it just kind of comes down to um, if capital is limited, is the best use of that limited capital to go back into the operating business for, expansion, modernization, you know, additive revenue, or should that capital be invested into a physical asset? Um, and so, on the buying side, you can build equity, but it will reduce your flexibility and increase your operational burden. Um, Things come up when owning a commercial building. It's not that different um, from a single family home if you own it, where you know there's just onesie twosie things that come up along the way, and every once in a while, a large item that comes up for a capital expense that you have to prepare for, and sometimes we see folks that maybe aren't as sophisticated on the property management side, not reserving enough capital or saving enough capital to really cover those items, which can be a very big hindrance once they do show up. Um, there are some tax benefits to owning the property. Obviously, that's going to all accrue to the property owner in the form of depreciation. Obviously, consult a CPA, as this is not tax advice and I'm not a tax professional. Um, at the end of the day, I think it really comes down to this last bullet of how certain are you that the space and location will fit your needs for at least the next 5 years. And again, if that certainty is less than 100% as it relates to a um, space or location functionality perspective, I would highly look at the leasing side of things, um, just to provide greater options for that operating business. And so, yeah, it looks like we have a question here in the chat about at what point should a business consider buying instead of leasing? So I think there's kind of the two key elements that come to my mind. The first one is related to this last bullet. How certain are you on your space and location needs for the next 5 years? If you need a 5,000 square foot office space with one, roll up door in the back, and you're not expanding, and it's, 10 minutes from your house and a, convenient drive for the rest of your workforce. Um, and that fits you now. And again, you're not expanding that much. It looks like that'll fit you in the foreseeable future. It could make sense. But if you don't have that perfect alignment there, I would lean towards leasing. For us, when we're looking at buying buildings, um, especially on the industrial side, we buy a lot of buildings from um, owner users who are downsizing, upsizing, leaving the business, ownership transition, and those are good opportunities for us, um, because we're able to generally get a pretty good deal because the market knows that that project's about to be vacant because the seller is an owner user and going to be leaving the space. Um, and so for us, when we're prospecting for new deals, we do look at that as an um, potential sourcing advantage. Um, so yeah, really it comes down to, oh, and the second item I would focus on is how unique is that building or your use. Um, Going back to the industrial side, if you've got a 5,000 square foot machine shop, but you need 2 acres of land for outdoor storage, machine storage, and there's just not that much available um, similar properties in the area, then it could make more sense to own that property. But if you're going into a very generic property that has a lot of um, other competing options, again, that scarcity drives value, obviously. And so if it's more of a generic on the run type property, I would also lean more towards leasing than owning. So some common leasing mistakes to avoid: always hire a lawyer. Always, I would emphasize the first and last piece here. Always hire a lawyer, always hire a tenant rep. One, yes, as a business owner, you're going to have to come out of your pocket and pay the lawyer to review the lease. It's money well spent. From a tenant rep brokerage point of view, generally you're not paying this person. We are as landlord, um, and they are going to help advise you as it relates to site selection. They'll be able to weigh in a little bit, back on that first bullet of what are maybe some lease terms that are market or not market. Um, and so I really emphasize 1 in 5 here of hiring those professionals. Um, unless you're a large business who is, churning through leases, um, as part of your day-to-day ops, you're just going to be at an disadvantage if your counterparty works on leasing, as their day-to-day activity, and this is the first lease that you signed in the last 10 years. Um, really review and understand the personal guarantee language, because at the end of the day, that is a true personal guarantee more often than not when it's structured. Um, and then the bullets 3 and 4 here. Again, so a gross lease is just where you have a stated rate, and that's what you pay. You're not paying any expenses, et cetera, on top of that. So for a gross lease, if it's $18 gross, you're paying $18 times your square footage that's allocated to your space. Whereas if you have a triple net or a modified gross or anything other than a gross property, you're having some sort of expenses charged back to you. And really making sure that you understand what that expense load is. If there's any caps as to how that expense load can be increased over time, as well as review and audit rights of that expense load. The other element I'd really focus on this rental rate piece is also taking into account tenant improvement allowances, or different landlord work that will go into the space, and you know negotiating that piece along with the rental rates. Looks like we've got a question in the chat here. What about small town malls with multiple businesses inside? I currently own one and just trying to come up with a game plan to fully utilize it. Empty warehouse space. Do you guys find potential tenants? So, so step one, we don't do a ton. We don't have a lot of retail activity. And most of it is either mixed use or standalone retail strip centers. So on the mall side, that is a little bit of foreign territory for me. Um, you know, we look around, and I live near Oakview Mall in Omaha. And so, I grew up going to Oakview Mall when Oakview Mall was still kind of alive. Um, And so obviously I've seen a lot of changes there. I would say the big thing that we're seeing right now is folks trying to repurpose large blocks of space into kind of alternative uses. And more around the entertainment side of things. So we've got some small kids, there's a couple of indoor play places. You're also seeing people go back to that entertainment side of um, arcades, um, golf simulators, kind of broadly simulators of all sorts. Um, I think the big thing here, you brought up some warehouse space. I think the key is to make sure that you have that right tenant mix where the warehouse use and functionality won't impact those small businesses in a negative way from a retail point of view. And just making sure that, that warehouse use is not going to be dirty, noisy, basically a bad neighbor to those other retail uses that are in um, that mall or that kind of cohabitated space. Um, and as it relates to, so for us, what we would do there, step one would be, um, we're going to hire a broker to go out, because while we have some contacts with people in the local area, we want to broaden that scope as much as possible. Um, and generally, brokers, candidly, brokers want to deal with other brokers. They don't necessarily want to deal directly with ownership, just because um, brokers speak broker language, and owners, even ourselves, can be a bit of a pain to deal with every once in a while. Um, and so a broker just allows like that kind of third party intermediary to maybe soften language or help guide ownership as it relates to what's market, what is not. And so I'd hire a broker. I would make sure that my space is as clean and ready to be occupied as possible. We see that small and medium businesses and really businesses kind of writ large today in office and retail, most don't have much vision as it relates to design or functionality. And so we white box or we'll do spec suites on as much as possible. Um, Office and retail leasing is difficult these days. And so when you've got a fish on the hook, you want to execute as quickly as possible because time kills all deals. And so making sure that you have something ready to go um, is key. You can't have the space look like it got vacated 7 years ago and hasn't been swept since. Really having it up to date, clean, and almost in occupiable condition, um, outside of maybe new paint and some accents for the tenant is where I would push you there, Jeremy. And if that doesn't answer your question, feel free to chime back in here, or I think we'll be sending around my contact info. So either way, if that did not answer your question, please let me know. Um, so site selection, again, this is where I think step one would be hiring a tenant rep broker. They're going to help you guide um, or help guide you in this process. Um, okay, good, Jeremy. Glad that it hopefully gave you a little bit there. So site selection, step one, I would say hire a tenant rep broker. What you don't want to do is just aimlessly drive around your immediate area looking for, leasing signs. Um, think about who your target customer profile is. Think about that building functionality and, what you really need to operate your business. And then also think about your workforce. And, really landing on those three items, I think will help guide you in having a more targeted analysis versus just driving the streets. Um, Traffic counts, again, it may seem easy, but uh, not all traffic counts are created equal. You have generally a commuting in and a commuting out type of dynamic on different roads, and especially for retail, that has a big impact on which side of the street you want to be on. If you're a coffee shop, you probably want to be on the uh, side of the road where it's a right turn on the commute in. And if you're a car wash, restaurant, other kind of retail avenue, probably want to be on the side of the street on the way home, or if you kind of have dual traffic, hard corners. Um, and then again, lastly, this may seem straightforward, but your a good owner is checking on this last bullet, making sure that the potential use is allowed by existing code. You'd be shocked at how often someone doesn't look into this. Um, and there are some nuances in different city codes where it can get very technical as to, this type of activity is allowed, this type isn't. And so just making sure that you check on that existing code and making sure that your potential use qualifies with the code that's in place. Last little piece here, negotiating leverage. Probably not a surprise, but on the office side, you know, tenants today have a lot more leverage than they did pre-COVID, and you're seeing that particularly in Class B suburban locations. Some of the infill, different infill downtown markets have varying degrees of strength or weakness where that could deviate from kind of what I laid out there. Office is very market to market and address to address, where you could have a property on one side of the street that's 95% full and has a great rent roll, and a very similar building directly across the street that is at 50% treading water, losing leases, not getting activity. Office is just very asset by asset at this point as relates to negotiating leverage. Um, Retail, again, really split between high and low demand areas. Not surprising. You follow the rooftops, you follow the growth kind of in Omaha, Lincoln, eastern Nebraska. And so you're seeing more of that landlord favorable nature in West Omaha and Southwest Lincoln, and then it being a little bit more balanced kind of throughout the rest of the metro. And then lastly, industrial, especially older industrial, I'd say is largely landlord favorable. Just this supply demand dynamic is much more in a landlord's um, favor in that market. And those are my prepared slides for today. Um, Again, happy to go back and touch on anything that I was running through or open it up for other tangents that folks may have questions on that hopefully I can answer.
Andrew, what are the biggest real estate mistakes you see business owners make?
Um, I mean, I would say the two are not hiring your third party professionals to do their job. Again, lawyers, tenant rep brokers, um, just having ownership take that on directly. Um, and then I'd say the other thing is on the lease versus own discussion of folks deciding to own because they think it'll be a great investment while not thinking about maybe some of the operational headaches or potential deviation between core operating business and ownership landlord side. So I'd say those were the two like big ones.
What signs should a business look for that indicate that they've outgrown their current location and that they actually do need to start looking for something new?
Yeah, I mean, it's tough because pre-COVID you had a lot of metrics around, like on the office side you'd have a lot of metrics around um square foot per employee. And with COVID and remote work, those dynamics are changing. um at the end of the day, I think it's you really know when where you're just like you're running into that those little frictions that become annoying as they pop up time and time again. You don't have enough desks for everybody. You're running out of storage. When it's really kind of hurting either you're hiring your core business and just kind of placing restrictor plates on maybe your growth or expansion in the business. Um, it could be time to start looking at a new location.
I guess and when you were talking about, when you're looking over the paperwork and the lease and whatever else, what hidden cost should businesses plan for beyond the rent or mortgage payment?
Yeah, I think it comes back to that triple net and CAM reconciliation side of things. So again, if you're a gross lease, it doesn't really apply to you. Um, However, even on gross leases, you're going to have to pay for a common area gross up. So if you think of like an office building, um, you obviously have the space that you occupy, but then if you just think about the spaces you use outside of maybe your four walls in that building. So, entry, exit, hallways, elevators, those are all being billed back to you through your um, both through a load calculation where you're adding basically additional square footage, your proportional amount of additional square footage to that four walls that you truly occupy. Um, and then you'll have some costs related to maintenance and upkeep of those areas. And then again, your basic triple net items of property taxes, insurance, and utilities.
Great. And I guess the last question I have for you, and if anybody, again, if you have any questions, please put in the chat. If you could give every business owner one piece of advice before making their next real estate decision, what would it be?
One piece of advice: hire a tenant rep broker. Uh, you know, you're not paying for it. And again, that person is helping advise other tenants similar to yourselves in the market day in and day out versus this may be again, the first time that you've identified a new site or negotiated a lease in potentially your career in 3 years, 5 years, 7 years. Um, and so I think that's a great way to, get some advice and some professional guidance. And again, you're not paying for it. So candidly, why wouldn't you?
Perfect. Thank you.
Yeah.
Again, we will be sending out the follow-up email with not only a link to the webinar, but also with the presentation information and then also Andrew's contact information. So if you do have other questions that you'd like to ask him specifically, not on the webinar and stuff, you can definitely do so. I'd like to extend a sincere thank you to you, Andrew, for sharing your expertise and the practical insights for us today. We greatly appreciate you taking the time to help us all understand real estate strategies and the support long term that businesses can have to succeed. Thank you to everyone who also joined us today. We hope that you found today's webinar informative and that you're able to leave with a couple of key things to look into when you're looking for your next space of rent, leasing, or even purchasing your own too. Also, just wanted to let you know in the email that we sent out, there will be a link to a survey in there for you too to fill out. Let us know what you thought of today's webinar, but also more importantly, giving us your feedback and letting us know what other types of webinars and things you would like to see in the Learning Lab series that you would find beneficial, but also other businesses and organizations would too. So again, we thank everybody for your time today. I hope you will join us again here soon for another webinar and hope you have a great rest of your day. Have a good one.